I tend to meditate in the mornings. I spend quite a bit of time in the mornings kind of in my head and in myself. And something came to me that said, start where you are. What do you have? I have enough to rent an apartment. Okay, well, that's what we're going to do. So the solution became the reason why it blew up in the first place.
Are you ready to learn how to grow your interior design business? Welcome to The Lounge, the Chase Lounge. So get comfortable, grab a glass of Cabernet, and let's talk the business of interior design. Now, here's your host, Nick May.
Well, welcome and thanks for joining me today in The Lounge. I'm Nick May, your host, and today we're going to be talking about growing your interior design business. So whether you're in Chicago, Milan, or Gaylord, Michigan, I know you want to do one thing. You want to grow your interior design business. And we're going to do just that by finding out how successful designers do that from around the world. We've got a great interview today from Canada. But before we do that, let me remind you, you can connect with me in a couple different ways over at thechaiseloungepodcast.com and on Instagram and on Facebook at The Chaise Lounge. Hey guys, you know that I'm a huge Benjamin Moore fan, but did you know that one of the reasons that I absolutely love Benjamin Moore is not necessarily because of all the great products, even though they do have great products. One of the things I love about Benjamin Moore is the service that I get. And I really want to encourage you to not just think of them as a paint company. Think of them as a resource for you as you're building your business. So if you've not reached out and gotten to know your local Benjamin Moore rep, and I'm not talking about your local paint store, I'm talking about the actual rep that lives in your area that you can call when you have a problem or you need a solution. So if you want to know the latest and greatest, you really do need to get to know your Benjamin Moore rep. If you don't know how to find your local Benjamin Moore rep, do me a favor, just reach out to me. I will make sure that you get a connection. So guys, I am recording, and I don't even think I said this the last one or two interviews that I've done, but I'm recording remote. So if I sound a little bit different, I'm not in the studio. I'm doing my interviews via Zoom. My office is recording me remotely. And I'm literally in the basement of my sister's house. As you guys know, I've been up in Wisconsin remodeling my cabin, but I won't be sharing pictures of that until maybe by the end of July. I have some pictures that I can actually share with you. But today's interview is really fun. I'm super excited. I didn't know anything about our guest today before I jumped online. And that's part of the joy for me is that I typically don't know a lot about the designers that I interview. This designer is from Canada. Let's jump into my interview with Nikki. Joining me in the lounge, I've got Nikki O'Neill. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, how's it going, Nick?
Good. I'm super excited to have you on the show this morning.
Me too. Thank you so much for chatting with me. I'm excited to kind of dive into this.
Well, I'm excited to hear your backstory and all about you. But before we do that, where are you talking to us from?
I am talking to you from Toronto, Canada. Our restrictions have just lifted a little bit more. So people are able to leave their homes and be a little bit more social. And people are like, it's felt like we've been trapped for like almost a year and a half. I mean, we've been trapped for a year and a half.
I have several friends up there that I talk to on a regular basis, and they're dying to be able to travel again. And so the restriction hasn't been lifted that you could actually like leave the country yet, right?
People are leaving, but it's not like a common thing. People are still feeling very restricted. And I think also people are still trying to feel it out and be more comfortable leaving their homes and feel safe and reintegrate before they just, jump out and jump on a plane again.
Yeah, we're in the Wild West down here in the States. So, it just depends on what state you go to. But I have traveled quite a bit.
Oh, I'm so jealous. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear about it.
Nothing fancy. I mean, like I've been, I live in Denver and I've been driving up to northern Wisconsin. So I go through like 3 or 4 states on the way, and some look at you funny if you have a mask on. Some, we're still requiring. But I think right now it's like, I hardly ever see a mask anymore. I saw one in the grocery store the other day. Yeah, I saw one in the grocery store the other day. And I was like, ooh, I wonder if they didn't get vaccinated.
Wow.
Anyways, We need to hear more about you and learn a little bit about your backstory. Did you grow up right there locally, or did you grow up somewhere else in Canada?
No, we moved quite a bit when we were growing up, but always Toronto, Canada's home for me. Okay. I mean, we call it the GTA. So within the GTA, whether it was Mississauga or Toronto or Brampton or just like the general Toronto area, GTA stands for the Greater Toronto Area. So I grew up within the Toronto area, but moved a lot. We moved almost like every year growing up. So
what was the cause for that?
As a kid, I don't know. I mean, your parents tell you whatever they want to tell you. I have no clue why we had to move all the time. And I'm an introvert. So I'm an extroverted introvert. So I know how to turn it on when I need to. But yeah. I was not an extroverted introvert when I was then. I was very quiet and very shy. So moving all the time was very traumatic, I think, for me.
You and Taylor would get along really well then.
Oh, is she the same?
Oh, yes. She's happier than a clam to just be at home reading a book.
You know, it's interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, oh, I'm good. This is like perfect territory. I don't got to see people. This is amazing.
I know. I saw a lot of memes like that on like Facebook and stuff. They're like, introverts were like, life is good.
Yeah, this is amazing. But towards the end, I was like craving people again. So I know, I mean, I feel really bad for the extroverts. If this is what I was feeling like towards the end, I mean, I could imagine what they were feeling throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm feeling a little bit like I've gone into quarantine up here in Wisconsin because there's not a whole lot. Like I don't see a lot of people most days, and I'm just at my cabin by myself unless somebody's coming to work. But I feel like I've kind of gone into a second quarantine almost.
I'm going to need to see pictures of this cabin that you're renovating.
Oh my gosh, it's 100 years old, and we're doing a lot, but it's nothing like. We decided against moving walls. The only walls we're doing is we have to close up some windows in the kitchen that are already covered up by like the refrigerator. So I don't know what that thought process was, but we're going to close those windows up and then we're going to add a closet because there's like no storage. It's really like nobody had lived in it for like 10 years because the people that really owned it, the parents, they passed away, I think like 4 years ago. But they were like 104 or 5.
Wow. So you guys really had to, dust it off.
Oh, yes. Lots of animals living in furniture. And so we had a dumpster and.
Ooh, you had a warm welcome when you.
Oh, yeah. So anyways, I've talked to a lot of people from Toronto and nobody has ever explained to me GTA before.
Oh, yeah. That's even if you are, generally when people ask where are you from, if you tell them that you're from Canada, most people will say Toronto because it's what people will recognize. You know what I mean? But most people are not living in Toronto. They're living on the outskirts. So GTA is essentially the outskirts and the Greater Toronto area. Yeah.
Right. Favorite childhood memory?
Oh, that's a hard one. That's so bad. Oh my God. How am I supposed to answer this question? I'm an Aquarius. We are so indecisive. You can't ask me to pick one.
First thing that comes to mind.
Okay. First thing that came to mind was Sunday morning, waking up, and my dad's playing Kenny G. My dad passed away earlier this year. And so the first thing I remember, surprisingly, I don't know why, is him playing Kenny G on Sunday morning. And us like dancing, or was it No, it was Saturday mornings he would do it because Kenny G always meant we're going to dance now, but then you guys are going to go do chores and clean the entire house. That's what Kenny G meant.
He had motivation. He was trying to inspire you to work fast.
So yeah, that's the first thing that pops in my head, but I have several.
Wow. It's always the best answer is always the first one that pops into your head. Favorite fashion accessory?
I don't accessorize. I'm not big on like accessorizing. I like keeping things very simple. So first, I always wear only one accessory. Oh, you know what? Okay, I have this earring that is like weirdly shaped. So you put the earring in your earring hole, but it's like a bar. So the entire bar covers your whole ear. Imagine like a spike. but it's not, it doesn't spike outwards so that it doesn't hit people. It goes upwards. So it's almost like it's going within your hair. Like, when you take a pencil and you put it up behind your ear. So this one, you put it in the hole, but it goes straight up. And then there's a little piece that dangles down. And I just like it because it's so weird and it looks like so convoluted. It's like a conversation piece. So it's just like people like, oh my gosh, I like your earring. It's always the thing that like people will notice. But that's what I do with like my accessories. It's always this like weird, convoluted one piece. And then everything else is like muted and very simple.
Here, I thought you were going to say hats.
I have a bunch of hats. I have tons of hats. I like shoes. But I mean, like, there's no one that I would like. It really depends on my mood. Again, you're asking questions to an aquarium. Like, we're going to just pick one, Right. Okay. So here's an easy one for you. What is on your coffee table right now? That's not an easy question because I don't have a coffee table.
Oh, well, then let's go nightstand.
I have shea butter mixed with frankincense.
Very minimalist.
You said this was going to be easy. I have shea butter mixed with frankincense in a little container. And yeah, that's what's on there. Nothing else.
That is it. Yeah. All right. Well, okay. So what's your favorite restaurant to go to? Is that an easy question?
No, but I do have one that's amazing right now that I just ate recently. Biblos in Toronto. Oh my gosh. If you visit Toronto, you must go to Biblos. The food there is
Biblos.
Yeah, Biblos. Byblos. Oh, food is so amazing. So amazing. You know what you need to get when you go there? Make sure you get the Brussels sprouts. I know.
I love them. I love Brussels sprouts.
Okay, you're going to love this.
Always have.
Most people hate Brussels sprouts. I'm not a fan of Brussels sprouts, but they do Brussels sprouts beautifully.
I took a road trip in the middle of COVID. I know I probably shouldn't admit that, but I did. We went and visited people for podcasting, and one of my team members hadn't traveled much, and we were in Savannah, Georgia, and he said he hated Brussels sprouts, and he also said he hated mushrooms. Well, we ordered Brussels sprouts and a mushroom pizza, and he walked out of there loving both. So we can turn people into Brussels sprout lovers. Now that COVID is lightening up, and soon, you guys are just now able to leave your house. Eventually, you'll leave maybe the city or the country. Where is one place in the world, now that you've been on lockdown, that you want to go to and visit as for vacation?
There's a few, but I think the first place I'll likely go is Costa Rica. I've never been to Costa Rica before. I never had a desire to go to Costa Rica, to be honest with you, but my sister's been there through the entire pandemic, and she's built a little cool community there. So I'd love to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'd love to go see. She has like this house that she's built, and she kind of does these cool events there and jungle theater nights and these dinners. And she has kids club that she has and takes local kids out to the beach and to event. Like, it's just this whole thing she's built there. So I'd love to go and visit her and see what she's doing.
Wow.
And then after that, I don't know how to pick, but I really want to go back to South Africa, surprisingly. Not surprisingly, I love South Africa. And when I went there, I fell in love with it. I actually wanted to move there just because the vibrancy of that place is just, it's infectious. But
yeah.
So I haven't been there in a long time, and I'd like to go back and visit.
Well, soon, very soon, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Beer, wine, or a cocktail?
I don't drink alcohol. You're just like, what kind of questions are these? It's like, who is this person that cannot answer basic questions?
These are all my just personal get to know you questions. That's always my last personal questions. That's our transition questions. And
let me tell you though, beer, I think tastes like earwax. Wine, I'm not a huge wine drinker, but I do like cooking with wine. And cocktails, virgin cocktails, I'm okay with. I don't mind the fruity sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So at what point when you were younger did you start to become interested in interior design?
Never. I grew up in a traditional African family. We're Nigerian. So that means immigrants, and I'm sure Nigerians would know this, but other immigrants will also know this. Immigrant children, let's say that. the only professions you are allowed to step into is to be a doctor, lawyer, and engineer. So I was artistic. I'm an artist at heart. I've always been, growing up, I painted and drew and all that. And my parents knew, obviously, but for them, that was like a hobby. So the idea of nurturing that was never a huge thing. It was literally like, what are you going to be, a doctor, lawyer, engineer? And I figured that I did like medicine. So out of all the options, that was the one that was the most appealing to me. So I actually wanted to be a doctor. I spent some time thinking, what is the most artistic field in medicine? I'm like, oh, I could be a plastic surgeon, like a reconstructive surgeon. So that's what I always thought I was going to do. I ended up, getting into university and doing life sciences and did this program at U of T, which was the university I went to, University of Toronto. And you get to shadow someone in the profession that you wanted to. So I got to live and shadow a general surgeon and left that experience saying, no, I do not want to be a surgeon. Not because I fainted in the operating room, which I did, but that's not the reason why. The reason why, when I looked at the lives of the surgeons and the doctors, it wasn't the type of lifestyle that I wanted. I really desired this like full lifestyle where I could enjoy my family and my friends, and they just didn't have the time to do that. I decided to go into biotechnology. So I was in pharma. Actually, I'm a scientist that now is an interior designer, but I went into biotechnology and worked in pharma for the first half of my career. I was in regulatory affairs. We are the people that would be the middle person between like Health Canada in our case, or like FDA in the States, and industry. And then opportunities and life happened, and I left that and started designing in a weird way.
Okay. So I have, my wife is a medical device engineer.
Ooh.
And she was, I think her first position at the company she's in was in regulatory. So she was responsible for being the person that you dealt with, probably.
So you're familiar.
Yeah, a little bit. And then my cousin's husband, and I'm pretty close with them, he's in regulatory for a drug company, but he deals with commercial shoots and makes sure that nothing is done out of legal compliance.
Yes.
So I've been exposed a little bit to both of those things. So I'm a little bit familiar with what you're talking about.
At one point, I was in the lab mixing solutions and genetically engineering things, but that quickly stopped because I was like, yeah, no, I do not want to put fish genes in a strawberry.
Where did the interest come from? You're working in pharma.
It wasn't necessarily an interest in that particular sense. The entire time that I was working in pharma, I was still doing my craft. Like I was still working, doing art. I was painting, I was sculpting. All my electives that I could take with school were all at art schools and all within the arts. Yeah. But what ended up happening that kind of shifted and geared me towards interiors was I bought a house.
I was going to ask, did you buy a house at some point?
I bought a house, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my goodness, my canvas can be 3-dimensional. And I just started building things, making furniture, ripping things out of my home. And a friend of mine, actually, who was a longtime mentor of mine, said, you should really share this stuff online. And I'm just like, and this was time when blogs were a thing, a big thing. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to put my business online. That's weird. And he was like, no, you should really put your business online. And I ended up listening to him, and the blog that I was working on at the time, or that I decided to put out, did really well. So that's kind of how I stepped into that. And people started asking me to do their homes. And I'm like, I'm not an interior designer. And they're like, I don't care. I just want my home to look like that. So I started doing that, and I started making more money than I was making in pharma and at work. And I was just like, hey, I have to make a decision here about what I want to do. And an opportunity presented itself for me to step into a role at one of Canada's leading design firms. I'm not sure. Now it's called Studio Munge, but before it was called Munge Leung. It was not as a designer. It actually was in administration and being in regulations. And there was some sort of a connection there that could benefit the studio. So I decided it was a difficult decision actually, because I had worked my way up quite a bit within the pharmaceutical industry. I was known, respected to a certain point. I traveled quite a bit. I had a company car. So I had built myself up to a certain point, and leaving meant that I would need to take pay cuts, demotion. I had to make a decision whether or not I wanted to, explore this world of design. And this was the perfect way to do that. So a big, big, big hit to my ego. And that was one of the hardest years of my life, not because of the work. It was mainly my ego.
So I talk to designers all the time that have gone through this. Lots of people, they're unhappy. They chose a career because they wanted to appease family and do all this kind of stuff and thought, I can never make money in arts. And so they go the career route. In fact, last week I talked to somebody else who had gone to medical school. She had that experience. She's like, nope, can't do this. And so I hear this quite a bit. What were the considerations that you went through? And then how did you tell your parents in the family?
It was different stages of that process. I told my mother I didn't want to be a doctor when I needed to select a specialist in university. I had finished my shadowing thing and realized I didn't want to do it. It took a couple months for me to do it. And I finally told her, and she was just like, okay. And I was just like, what? So when I told her that I wanted to get into interiors, there was one situation when I decided to leave my beautiful, well-paying, secure job to go work as a glorified assistant. I don't think I actually consulted my mom at that time because I didn't need the additional pressure. So there's different points. I do remember one time I was, again, the same mentor had a interactive art festival that was going on, and he was working with the curators. And he said, hey, I have somebody who makes these beautiful pieces of furniture. I think it'd be great to have her as one of the furniture artists for the show. So I was I was going to, different salvage places and secondhand shops and all these different things, finding these furniture pieces. And I remember my mom was looking for a desk, and I picked up this desk for her. And I said, hey, Mom, can I drop off this desk for you? Because I know you need it. And she's like, yeah, sure. So she comes into my car, now packed with what looks to her like garbage. She is like, okay. So I dropped off the desk, and I could tell that she was perturbed. There was something that was off about her. The next morning she calls me and she's like, hey, can we have brunch? And when your African mother says brunch, you're like, oh shit, something's up. I'm like, brunch, what do you know about brunch, So the next morning she's in front of me, looking at me dead in my retina. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm just checking your vital signs. I think you've lost your mind. And I'm like, what? She's like, people that are your age are like going out and, dating and like doing, and you're packing your car with furniture. I don't know what's going on with you. I'm like, Mom, there are people out there that are on hardcore drugs, and my vice is like reclaiming furniture. And you're like concerned.
You want to have an intervention?
Yeah, I know. So it was, so there was different times along the way. The first time that my mom actually said, okay, yes, this is for you, and accepted it, was when I got on television. And when her friends saw me on television and started calling her and like, oh my gosh, I saw your daughter. And then she was like, okay, this is something, right? That was the whole transition with my mom. But the transition with stepping into the industry was the decision wasn't difficult. The ego part was difficult. Steve Jobs has this quote, which I'm going to butcher, but I'll get the gist of it. And it's something along the lines of, when you've woken up too many days in a row and looked at yourself in the mirror and you're not living in the life that you want, then you know that the change needs to happen. Again, I completely butchered that. It probably doesn't sound anything like that, but that's the gist of it. And I remember actually standing in the mirror and I was like, yeah, no, this is not my ever after. This is not my life, being in pharma and waking up and hating this every day. It's just not, it's not within me to do that. It takes up too much energy to resist that. So I knew very early that I needed to find something else. And the opportunity, though not in line with what I had built and who I saw myself as. Being this assistant was not who I was, but it offered me access and a step in a door that I otherwise would never have had. I didn't go to design school. So why would I be working at the top design firm, one of the top design firms? Like there's no way that I would have had that access. Not only that, but I had quite a bit of access to the principals at the time, access to their emails, obviously. So I was able to learn the business. I was able to learn something that people that go to design schools don't get to learn. But I got access to the business side of things that literally allowed me to see. But yeah, I guess that was the transition.
How long were you there?
I gave myself a year. I did not stick to that. I stayed for a year and a half. I know myself very well. I come with a lot of confidence and assurance of myself, but within that year, I grew the most, and I thought that I was going there to learn about design. Yes, my eye was refined, but what I learned was about myself. Right. I learned how to operate in the realm of design. Not only that, but also operate with assertiveness, because the dynamics of where I was and who was my direct rapport and our relationship required me to be assertive, required me to stand my ground, required me to speak up, and all these things that I never had to do before because people knew who I was. And all of a sudden I was put in a situation where no one gave a damn about who I was. They didn't know that I had a design eye. They didn't know I was an artist. They didn't know anything. They thought, hey, Nikki, could you go load the dishes? And in my head, I'm like, load the dishes? So there was a lot there, but it was, nobody knew who I was. So it gave me time to step back and to soak things in. I didn't need to be anybody. I just needed to soak things in.
What on the business side? So I love that you learned the assertiveness. What did you learn from the business side that helped you later on?
Surprisingly, when I stepped into the role as an administrator, very quickly, I became more of an executive assistant to one of the principals. And with that allowed me to have quite a bit of access to his emails and things like that. What surprisingly, I think there's lots of people who would love to have access to see how people interact with people. That's what I learned. I learned how to interact with people, not necessarily negotiate, but it gave me the opportunity to watch how he spoke to clients. It sounded as though he was talking to friends. I was like, oh, I came from a corporate environment, and it took quite a bit of time to beat the corporateness out of me. Like I remember countless discussions I had and talks and him pulling me aside saying, you cannot wear those shoes. You cannot dress in this, we're so laid back here, dress down. I was so stuck in this corporate, I was wearing suits, and he's like, calm down, So he's like, calm down, you can wear sneakers. I'm like, I don't even own sneakers, so I had to really beat the corporateness out of me and the formalness out of me, and watching how he interacted with clients, watching how he spoke to them, watching how he moved through space you can't take a course in that.
Right.
You can't take a course in how you walk in a space and command attention. People look at you because you're interesting. There was something about him that allowed people to be drawn to him, and the way he spoke to people and how he spoke to people. So all that I literally had a front row seat to kind of soak that in and learn and correct myself and edit. And I don't want to say edit, because at the end of the day, what I was able to soak in allowed me to kind of find my own stride. But at the time, it was very much just watching how he communicated with people. It was literally an education on people.
Was he different with those people than he was behind the scenes?
I didn't have access to his private life, so I didn't actually necessarily see, but in terms of how he interacted with clients versus how he interacted with studio, it was very similar. His energy was the same when he was with clients as it was with the studio. When he came into the studio, because he was out of the Munch and the Liang, the one that traveled quite a bit. The other part was more in studio and worked with the designers. But the one that traveled quite a bit, that was the one that I had was the executive assistant for, but when he came back and he was back in studio, that same infectious energy followed, the same draw. It was just him, it was just him. And there was a confidence about him and a sureness and a little bit of crazy. I don't know. I know that sounds weird, but you need a little bit of crazy,
No, I've met them. I mean, I'm not him, but I know what you're talking about. But
you need that little bit of crazy or that little bit of something. It's like, something that burns within, and people could tell it was apparent that something burned within. So that's what people were responding to. So it was interesting to be able to watch that. And then just as interesting to find my own burn.
Okay. So after a year and a half, you leave, and is that when you started your own?
No. It's such a weird, convoluted story. You know what? No, at the time when I was working there, I was still doing projects on the side. So right. I was, when I said that I had to make a decision because I started making more money doing my projects than I was making at work, part of that was also there. Also, I had taken a pay cut, so obviously I was making more. But the business that I was doing, my company at the time was called 800 Square Feet. I focused on small spaces. At the time when I left, I had this burning idea that I just needed to do, and I needed to leave in order to dedicate my time to it. And essentially what I ended up doing was opening up Canada's first shoppable apartment. So everything from the furniture to the art, to the food in the fridge, the clothes in the closet, to the products in the bathroom were all shoppable. And I would flip it 4 times a year, and I would change the persona that lived in the apartment so I could curate the space based on whoever was living in it at the time, this imaginary person. And I would change the space and then open it up to people to come in and experience it and shop and all this sort of stuff. So anyways, I ended up doing that. I didn't know anything about opening up a retail store. I didn't have the money to open up a retail store, but I did have enough money to open up, to rent an apartment and curate that and figure out how I was going to do this so that people could actually shop it. I didn't know that it would blow up, and that's just what happened. It took off and it was everywhere. I was in papers and I wasn't ready for that. I literally was like, let me try this thing. I have this feeling that I need to do it. So let me just do it. And it was immediately insane. I wouldn't change anything, but it was too quick. I didn't know what I was doing really. I knew how to design and I knew how to curate space, but the whole business aspect of it and running a store and this sort of thing. And it was a lot, but I literally, it was 2 years of like high intensity attention and trying to make sure that I, kept up with this. And then I closed it after 2 years because I needed to breathe. It was too much. I know that's weird. You close a successful business, but yeah, so that was it was called the Apartment by 800 Square Feet. So I was designing, I had 800 square feet, which was the design firm. I did small spaces. And then the shop was called the Apartment by 800 Square Feet. So that was when I left, and that was how I got on the map. That's how I got on television, and that's where my notoriety came from and being known. And then I was able to kind of take that into other areas and build my business that way.
So everything in the space was for sale. Mm-hmm. Was it one-time sales? Like they're going to buy that chair. Now that chair is gone and you have to replace with something different, did you have like stock of that chair?
Both. So there was the smaller items like decor pieces and things like that. I had stock. There was one-off pieces that I had found and had brought in and those sort of things that added to the flavor of the space. I worked with local artists, so all the art in the space was on commission basis. And so depending on the product, it all had different revenue streams and different forms, So for example, the fridge was sponsored. So Pusateri's, which is a beautiful store. I don't know if you guys have Pusateri's there, but it's not like Whole Foods, it's like a fancier Whole Foods. But they sponsored the fridge. Okay. Yeah, they sponsored the fridge. So, or the closet, I would get designers that would stock the closet, and it would flip again based on whoever was living in the space. I was able to curate it in such a way where part of it was branded. Part of it was experiential because I would have events. And because it was literally and physically an apartment, I couldn't operate it like a retail store. So what I would do is I would curate the space, and then I would drop the the dates that it would open, and people had to book appointments, and those would get filled, and I would only have a certain amount of appointments available. So
I love it. God, I love it.
It would create this frenzy, and then all of a sudden,
God,
so it was just a recipe for. It was a recipe for it was Instagrammable. It was literally just like FOMO. You know, you had to be on point. When I dropped it, you didn't want to miss out, so you had to get on the ball. So the whole structure of it created this allure about the space. It was brilliant. It was amazing. But it took everything out of me.
Where did you come up with this idea?
I came up with the idea because I needed a solution to the fact that I couldn't afford $10,000 a month on Queen Street or downtown Toronto for a furniture shop.
Right.
I wanted, my original idea was I wanted to open up a furniture shop that was dedicated to small space furniture that had personality. We know the IKEAs, we know all these modular furniture that was boxed, but I needed something that was spoke to the personality of the people who were acquiring these pieces. And I didn't see that anywhere. So that was what I wanted to originally create. But when I went downtown and I talked to a bunch of shop owners or, landlords or whatever, very quickly realizing I don't have $10,000 a month to pay for this. So I was like, okay, so how do I tend to meditate in the mornings. I spend quite a bit of time in the mornings kind of in my head and in myself. And something came to me that said, start where you are. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to start where I am, what do you have? I have enough to rent an apartment. Okay, well, that's what we're going to do. So the solution became the reason why it blew up in the first place, because it was now this shoppable apartment that had never been in Canada. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So everything after that was just catering to the reason I had limited slots was because it was an apartment. It's not a retail store. So I can't have droves of people or else my neighbors are going to be like, what is going on? So everything was very fluid. It was like an ecosystem that just literally, I didn't know that much about business to create that sort of, marketing, bliss, but it just happened.
Oh my gosh. Totally unrelated, but it reminds me of an interview I did with, she's like the comedy queen of America. She owns a comedy club called Comedy Works in Denver. When I was interviewing her, I was like, Wendy, what's the deal with the line outside? Like, isn't there a way that you could do this so there's no line outside? And she goes, oh, that's the magic. We create a line and everyone's like, oh, what am I missing out? So it was FOMO before we even knew what FOMO was, right? And she's like, you have this line, everybody's like, what's going on there? We got to go there, So I love that you just created this demand. I mean, probably pretty easy because you can only, how many spots, how many times a day would you let people book to come in?
So the initial period, I would do 3 slots a day. So I would break it up. So the first couple days, like the Monday and the Tuesday, I would allocate to media. And then the rest of it would be left for the people, And then I would have 3 slots a day. And within those slots, I could allow 5 to 8 people within those slots for that. So that was how I broke it up. So morning, afternoon, evening. And then after that, once that week was up, you could only come based on book an appointment to come and see.
Wow. How did you know to go after media?
I didn't know not that I didn't know. I had access to that world a little bit. And I had a friend of mine that actually was supposed to be a partner. We were going to do this together. And she got pregnant and she decided that she wasn't going to do it. And she had other things going on. So she decided she was going to bow out. But she had a niece of hers that was in marketing. And this is why I said everything was serendipitous. I think this was meant to happen. So the universe just provided. But she was like, hey, what are you doing for media? I'm like, I'm so busy. I can't even think about this. She's like, yeah, she's like, well, why don't I get Hannah to jump in and help you? So Hannah, that was working at a marketing firm, spent the entire 2 days emailing everybody. So all of a sudden, I had all these reputable media companies booking to be to attend the launch of this, and I was like, "Oh shit! Sorry, I need to stop swearing."
You're fine.
Oh man, this is real. This is real. So once that happened, like she literally, things wouldn't have been the same actually and the funny thing is that Hannah usually lives in LA. So she just happened to be in town that period. She just happened to be in town for that time where her aunt was like, "Hey, can you do this for me?" That was it. It was these are just the things that just don't happen but happen anyways, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay. So you do that for 2 years, you shut that down, and everyone probably thinks you're crazy at that point. And then what happens? Then what do you do?
Everybody thought I was insane, but I was so drained. I didn't have any creative juice left. So I literally took 2 years off and I stopped everything except for television. I'm a design expert on a daytime talk show called Cityline. I was still taking clients during my 2-year break. My 2-year break just meant that I wasn't working like an absolute dog. So I was taking on projects during those 2 years, smaller projects and things like that. But literally that 2 years, what I had built over those 2 years. And I also had quite a bit of Airbnbs at the time. So that allowed me to literally take 2 years off and just like catch my breath, find my breath. Let's say that. I started putting a lot more focus into Nikki O'Neill, 800 square feet as a brand. 2 years off, it was what I needed, but I started putting more time into, okay, you know what, let me build out my design business. Let me create something new, pour more into what I had here. And that was where I started really focusing on my design firm, really focusing on building that out, really focusing on how I could integrate that and use that with my television career and all these sort of things. And quite a bit of opportunities presented themselves because of the apartment. So it allowed me to kind of tap into a lot of things and build relationships with media and press and, and publications and things like that. And that's how I kind of was able to build my business and not only build my business, but also show my work.
So now the business today, do you still focus on those small spaces?
No. So my business, I rebranded last year. So when I stepped back into design in a more intentional way, I realized that a lot of the work that I was doing, most of the work that I was doing was not actually focused around small spaces. I was doing restaurants, I was doing commercial spaces, I was doing larger spaces. So I realized that branding my company all around small spaces was not actually a depiction of the work I was actually doing. The other thing that I noticed was that what actually fed me, what actually fed my soul was the work I did with people. So when I'm working with a client for the first time, when I step into their home, we speak very little about design, actually. I just talk to them the same way we're talking. And I learn about them and I ask them to give me a tour of their space. And as they're giving me a tour of their space, they're talking. And if you watch somebody who moves through space, it's very telling. When they're showing you their home, they gravitate and linger around things they love. They try to skip over things that they're trying to hide or that they don't love. And those are the things that I kind of like, no, let's go back here. And we talk through those things. So as we're kind of moving through their space, by the end of that interaction, I actually have a very good idea based on what I know of them and who they are and what they exude and what we're trying to correct of what the space is going to look like. Also, some of the questions I ask, and I don't even actually need to ask, they end up divulging or providing information about what is lacking to them. For example, I had a client that had been married for 10 years and realized after 10 years that her husband had been cheating on her for like 9 of those years. So now as she was walking through the space, I could tell that it was almost like she was allergic to the entire space. And I was like, so what we're actually creating here is not just redecorating. What we're actually doing is creating a space that is a representation of you, because everything about this reminds you of your life that you built, So once I get an understanding of what it is that we're actually trying to create, then we go in and we create it. So in doing all that, I realized that the work I was actually doing was not just focused around design. It was a holistic experience. It was about people. It was about telling stories through space. Yes, I was able to paint the picture in 3 dimensions, but the point of it were the people. So when I rebranded last year, it was to capture that. It was to capture what I was actually doing. So my company now, or my studio, is called Studio Ode. And it's an homage to people and an homage to stories. And what we do is literally the branding around Studio Ode is all about telling stories through space. So we do interiors, we do public work. We have a amazing public installation that's coming up next year, 2022 Nuit Blanc for the city of Toronto. And we do online space as well. So the work that we do is very much about telling stories through space.
I love that. We talk here a lot at IME Media. We talk of the business side of interior design, but I've been a firm believer that everything that we do now is based on our past, good, bad, and ugly. And that's why, Nikki, when we started talking about your personal life. Mm-hmm. And I went through a lot of different questions. And it's just fun to see how I end up connecting that somehow from your past to present. And I would say it has a lot to do with your family, like how you grew up with your family and your connection with your family.
You know, it's interesting. I was doing this other podcast actually, and the girl was asking me all these personal questions. I'm like, I answered them, but I was like, why is she diving and asking me all these like personal questions? But she made this statement. I talked about how we moved around a lot and this, and she said, do you think the fact that you moved around a lot in some way affected the work that you do now? Because it seems like you now are creating space for people, creating home for people. Did you feel before that you didn't have one? I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I never made that correlation. I never made the correlation of feeling unattached to like this essence of home.
Yeah.
You know, home for me was not the building I was in. It was my family, because those were the constants, you know, but this idea of now creating home for people and what that looks like in a physical space, I was like, I never realized that part of the reason that was naturally coming from me was almost like a correction of what I didn't have when I was growing up, you know? Yeah, it's very interesting. I think there's quite a bit actually of what I do now that comes from my family, my upbringing. It's interesting.
Yeah, I liked what you were saying about how you can learn from the people that are showing you their space based on what they avoid and then what they linger on. People do the same thing when they're talking to me.
Really?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sometimes I pry a little bit, but sometimes I know to just leave certain things alone.
I see.
So what have you not been able to do yet that you still want to in your design business?
International. I'd like to create, there's two things. I'd like to teach, which is strange considering I didn't study design, but not from the perspective of like the principles of design or anything like that. I think I'd like to talk about the human aspect of it, of design. So something along the lines of that. But also I'd like to paint in the streets of Africa. Paint meaning buildings, create buildings and, you know, add to that, leave my mark there. Not just in Africa, there's several places that I'd like to kind of leave marks on. But I think what I absolutely love, it just brings me so much satisfaction, is seeing how people interact with the work that I do. So that's why I stepped into doing more public work, because the work that I was doing was very limited, only having people interact with my work in their homes, you know, and the story is only being told from one perspective of the homeowner or the person living in that home. But when you are creating public work, you have to now tell the story of the community. And that is like, whoa, that's a lot. Like to see how you can now create space for a community, now tell their story, not only tell their story, but like create something that that becomes part of the ecosystem blows my mind. So to be able to do that in Canada is incredible. One of the works that I'm working on right now for the city of Toronto, like I was saying, for Nuit Blanc 2022, is called the Touch Project. And the Touch Project is all around how we interact. Essentially, in Toronto, we have the equivalent of like Times Square, is called Yonge and Dundas Square, right? So imagine you're walking by Yonge and Dundas Square and there's this black box, massive black box. And you're like, what is that? On the side of it, it says the Touch Project. And you walk in, there's a line and you walk into it and you walk into this long corridor that's slightly colder than outside. And you turn the corner and you're met by this opening and you stand in the front of the opening and all of a sudden the slot opens and you're met with a pair of eyes. And that first experiment is a 3-minute eye gazing experiment or experience with a stranger. You're literally staring into the eyes of the stranger for a period of time. The next slot opens up and it's for hands. I'm going to have to tweak this a little bit because I'm not sure how things are going to happen with COVID, but you're holding the hands of the stranger for 3 minutes. And the last one is sound. And they're to tell you a secret that you've never told anybody before to the stranger. And then you walk out of this box and all the screens around you are of all the people that have taken part in this experiment. So you would see the faces of the people that you've interacted with, but you'll never know because you'll never know which person it is because all the faces are. So this whole experiment is around how we now connect and what does intimacy look like, one, within the community, but also in a period of extreme deprivation. There's people that haven't touched people in like large periods of time because of the pandemic. So all of a sudden exploring intimate space with strangers, what does that look like? What does that feel like? So experiential work, building that out is something that I'd love to do more of on a larger scale. I just like disarming people. When you create work that it evokes or brings out memories, it immediately takes you back to a period and immediately allows guards that we hold up and barriers that we hold up just because that's how we are to drop. It's like walking somewhere and then all of a sudden you just see colors everywhere and you become a kid all of a sudden and you laugh with people that you've never laughed with or know. And I just like disarming people and creating the unexpected in unexpected places. So yeah, doing that sort of thing, I think a lot more is definitely something that I'm looking to step into more.
Well, where can we send people to learn more about you and what you've got going on?
Studio Ode. You can, go to my website, which is of things with an S, ofthingsode.com, or on Instagram. My personal page is at Nikki O'Neill, and Nikki is, yes, spelt like Nike, Nike, last name O'Neill, Onile. Yeah, so those are pretty much, or Of Things Ode is also the business Instagram and handles.
Awesome. Well, we will put links to those in the show notes. And I just want to thank you so much for giving me your time this morning.
It's a pleasure, Nick. Thank you so much for including me in this. I'm so excited to not only hear my story, played back to me, but also hear the stories of the other, guests that you're going to be talking to this season.
Well, thanks a ton.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
So after today's interview, you have zero excuse for saying, I don't have a portfolio. I don't know where to start. Nikki she couldn't open up a studio. She couldn't buy a house, remodel it, and, do all that. We've talked to people that do that. So she goes out and rents an 800 square foot apartment and turns that into an experience. Oh my gosh. I love this. I just love it. It built her reputation. It got her on television. There was just so much we talked about. I loved when she was talking about working for the other design firm, how she learned by watching this principal deal with people. And that is so important in business. And she's just lovely. And that's the hard part about, not traveling and not going to markets and not getting able to meet people face to face anymore. But hopefully at some point. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you today. I'm Nick May, reminding you to keep dreaming big and keep designing a great design business. See ya.